Washington Journal continues.
Our guest now is Congressman Mike Coffman, Republican of Colorado, member of the Armed Services Committee, here to talk to us about Afghanistan. Congressman, in the Post today, they preview the president's report on all of this, and it says the War Review cites strides, is less confident on Afghan governance. What are you looking forward to seeing in this report from the White House?
Well, I think that, where we're at right now, the real concerns that we, in fact, are not, we're making progress on the ground militarily, but I think what the report so far identifies, although the final one is not going to be out until tomorrow, is clearly that the governance piece is lacking, and that where we are able to take ground, to hold the ground, but we can't transfer it because they don't have the capacity right now to do that governance piece, and so that's very significant. And so it's what is going to be the strategy going forward. I think that's going to be the key question.
So let's pose that question to you then.
Sure.
What should the strategy be moving forward?
Well, I think we have a strategy that is unrealistic right now. I think that it's too heavily dependent on a very robust counterinsurgency strategy, and that requires nation building. And I think that we're trying to restructure Afghan society. We're trying to build them an economy that they never had. We're trying to develop a government for them that doesn't fit their political culture. So I think we really have to lower the bar in Afghanistan to recognize what are our strategic concerns in the country, and let's focus on those. And I think we're far too idealistic on what we think we can accomplish there.
Let's put the phone numbers on the screen. Keep them on the screen for our guest, Mike Coffman, Republican of Colorado, just finishing up your first term, member of the Armed Services Committee. Republicans, you can call 202-624-1111. Democrats, 624-1115 is your number. And Independents, 202-624-0760. What's your take on the work of the Armed Services Committee in these first 2 years of your congressional career?
Well, I think it's been very exciting, having served in both the Army and the Marine Corps, having served in Iraq, first Gulf War and the Iraq War. So I was there in 2005, 2006. So I was pretty much at the point of the spear in terms of what I would call nation building in this counterinsurgency strategy that we're trying to deploy to Afghanistan. I think it's as difficult as it was in Iraq. It is more difficult in Afghanistan. And so I just think that I don't think we're in the right direction right now.
How do you take that military experience and apply it to comments to your colleagues when you're trying to craft legislation, trying to craft policy or an effect in a debate? You have that unique perspective.
Well, I do, but fortunately that there are some other members. I think there's been fewer over time that have military experience, and probably fewer among those that have served in Iraq. But I think right now on the Armed Services Committee, there's Duncan Hunter from California, served in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and I think Patrick Murphy from Pennsylvania, who served in Iraq.
The Post lead says that the president met for nearly 2 hours with top national security aides Tuesday to give final approval to a year-end review of his war strategy in Afghanistan and Pakistan before a summary of the assessment is publicly released on Thursday. Robert Gibbs, the White House press secretary, spoke briefly about it yesterday. Here's a look.
I think that when you see the review on Thursday, I doubt there will be, in all honesty, a lot of surprise at what the review lays out. I think you will see, as many of you have written and reported, that there has been some important progress in halting the momentum of the Taliban in Afghanistan. We have seen through counterterrorism success at degrading senior al-Qaeda leaders. And we've seen greater cooperation over the course of the past 18 months with the Pakistani government. You will also see in the review an enumeration of the continued challenges that we have in that region. They will focus on a few different areas, but clearly we have to continue to strengthen capacity inside of Afghanistan. And we still have the ongoing challenge and threat of safe havens in Pakistan.
There's a passage in the Post story that says an administration official anonymously talking about the classified document, largely classified, described it as, quote, diagnostic rather than prescriptive, outlining areas in which goals are being met as well as those where things aren't working so well. The assessment is designed to set the agenda for decision-making in the spring, the official said. Congressman Coffman, with Republicans moving in control of the House and the committee, what do you think that give and take will be like between the committee, the Congress, and the White House over Afghanistan?
You know, I think oddly enough that the president is probably, in this one area, the president's probably got to be thankful that in fact, although my view probably differs from a lot of Republicans and probably from a lot of Democrats as well, it's fairly neat, but it's probably based on the fact that I served in Iraq with the United States Marine Corps. But I think that the president got some breathing space on his strategy that I think that Democrats were by and large not supportive of this kind of robust, heavy footprint in Afghanistan, and the Republicans tend to be more supportive. So I think the president's policy got some more breathing room with the 2010 election.
So before we get to calls, Congressman, let's bring in this story. It's a pretty interesting one. It's the lead story in the New York Times. It says that U.S. intelligence offers a dim view on the Afghan war. They write that as President Obama plans to release his review of strategy, 2 new classified intelligence reports offer a more negative assessment and say there is a limited chance of success unless Pakistan hunts down insurgents operating from havens on its Afghan border. The reports, one on Afghanistan and one on Pakistan, say that although there have been gains for the U.S. and NATO in the war, the unwillingness of Pakistan to shut down militant sanctuaries in its lawless tribal region remains a serious obstacle. And they go on to talk more and more. Dim view, they say.
Well, I think that that's probably fairly accurate, would be my guess. I was in Afghanistan a few weeks ago in a congressional delegation visit. You know, I think we have to review what our objectives are there. It's clearly to keep al-Qaeda out of Afghanistan, but also we need the ability to hunt them down in the ungovernable areas of Pakistan, the tribal areas, and we've been able to do that with having a bases in Afghanistan, and also to keep the country from falling to the Taliban, because I think the fact is that if it were to fall to the Taliban, that I think that would further endanger the stability of Pakistan, a country with nuclear weapons that is inherently unstable. So I think we have to recognize what our interests are, and we have to pursue a policy reflective of those interests. I think right now our policy is way beyond our strategic interest in the region. And I think it's unrealistic, and I think that's why we're in trouble, and I think that intelligence estimate is correct.
Quick follow-up here. It says the findings in the reports called the National Intelligence Estimates represent the consensus view of the U.S. 16 intelligence agencies as opposed to the military, and were provided last week to some members of the Senate and House Intel committees. The findings were described by a number of American officials who read the report's executive summary. First call for our guest, the Congressman Mike Coffman, Republican of Colorado. Alexandria, Virginia. Brad, Republican. Hi.
Hi, good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Hey, I want to agree with you. I do agree on your comments regarding we are on the wrong track in terms of trying to build this larger, more centralized governance structure in Afghanistan, and trying to essentially apply more a Western model of governance, or what we would see as normal governance, to these areas and to these previously ungoverned and unruled districts. However, I think big picture. I served with the Marine Corps recently in Helmand Province here, and I think big picture we're not doing it. We just pay lip service to it. We put a lot of stock into what the district governors are saying, what the provincial level governors are saying, but all these individuals are appointed from Kabul. So what you have is a very centralized structure, and this structure is very far removed from what's actually going on in the ground, at least as I saw it in the district that I served in. I used to call it the story of the mustache. You have gentlemen who represent the government. They have a mustache, meaning that they somehow were affiliated with the former communists or the Halki or the Parcham party in the 80s that kind of served more Russian interests. And we could say Russian communist interests, I'd say more pragmatic interests. Where on the other side, you have the locals, and they're the bearded ones. They have these big tribal beards, and they're completely, they don't have an education. They're heavily involved in poppy farming in Helmand Province, and a lot of these concepts that we're trying to apply are incredibly foreign to them. So I would say to high level, I think at the battalion level, we are trying to establish grassroots initiatives. However, I think we're being undercut.
Thanks, caller. Congressman, what do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for your service to the United States Marine Corps in Afghanistan. Nothing can replicate that in terms of a knowledge of the area. But I think that that's 100% right. I mean, the fact is, we put all of our emphasis so far, or our dominant emphasis, on a centralized government that's historically fairly alien to them. I mean, and not placed that same emphasis on establishing governance at the provincial level. Now, I think I've talked to Secretary of Defense Gates, and he's told me how that they're trying to develop a strategy that changes that. But I think that's a real concern. But I think the basis thing is again, we're trying to create a Western style form of government that simply doesn't fit within the political culture of the country, and we've got to I don't want to say dumb it down, but we've got to lower the bar and not try and do so much in terms of trying to create the kind of democratic institutions that we're familiar with that they're not.
Milford, Connecticut. Linda, you're on the line for Democrats. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Congressman. First of all, I find it interesting that after all this time, we're still in diagnostic and not prescriptive. I also find it interesting that in Iraq, after all the time, we kind of got to know the different Shiites, very new terms and sects and everything. But yet Afghanistan, even the general public, we don't really seem to know. We don't have this kind of structure that even existed in war-torn Iraq. And this is all going on a credit card, and at a credit card of blood more than money. And I really think that we have to just worry about setting ourselves up against terrorism attacks and not build a government. I don't think they want a government. I think humanitarian aid and that thing. But these people are like us, and they want to govern themselves. And I think we've turned a tin ear to that. And I think it's time that we totally went into diagnostic and out of diagnostic and into prescriptive, and really started to know our place and do what we can to make their lives as better as we can. But in all honesty, just kind of bow out gracefully and let the Afghanistans have the country that they want.
Mr. Coffman.
Well, thank you so much for your call. I mean, I do think we have strategic interests in the region that require a presence, or at least that we have an understanding of what's going on and can influence what's going on, so Al-Qaeda doesn't come back into Afghanistan, and that we have the ability, again, to utilize bases or positions in Afghanistan to strike at terrorist targets inside of Pakistan, as we've recently done in Waziristan. But let me just say this. I think we took the wrong turn from the beginning. In the beginning, after 9/11, I think what President Bush did initially was brilliant. That we were attacked by Al-Qaeda, who utilized areas in Afghanistan operationally to plan and execute that attack. They were given safe harbor by the Taliban. And even after 9/11, the Taliban would not turn over Osama bin Laden. So what we did was we gave air advisory and logistical support to the anti-Taliban forces, the Northern Alliance, and they pushed the Taliban out of the country. What we should have done at that point is used our leverage to go to them and say, look, you are the victors on the ground. You need to reach out to, say, the anti-Taliban Pashtun elements of the country, and have a governance structure that is representative of the country, but fits your political culture. Instead, we forced them aside, pushed them aside, superimposed a political process that gave them the government that we wanted, that doesn't fit the country today, that is weak, that is corrupt, that is, in fact, over the years, have allowed the reinfiltration of the Taliban into areas that they once occupied. And so we've taken the wrong turn. I think now we have an unrealistic course that is too much. When I was there, they were talking about, we've mandated certain requirements for women's rights on them. Now, I'm from a humanitarian perspective. I think that's a very, very important goal. But do we want to really make that a principal mission in Afghanistan? So we've added in. This has just been mission creep. So we've added in, objective after objective in trying to make them look like us. And at the end of the day, I don't think we have the resources to make that happen.
Our guest has served in the Army and the Marine Corps. Mike Coffman has also served in the Colorado House, the Colorado State Senate, was also Colorado State Treasurer, and then moving on to a run in Congress a couple of years ago. So you're ending your freshman term. What led you to running for the U.S. House?
Well, I'm being, I think, very interested in national security issues. I think having that experience of having served in the military for a fairly long period of time, enlisted Army, officer Marine Corps, and then serves in the first Gulf War and the Iraq War. So I think that experience and concern about the direction of the country led me to run.
What else does your experience, both in the field as a soldier, also a congressman visiting that part of the world, what can you tell us about what you see with your own eyes and hear with your ears that we can't grab off the newspaper? Give us a more of a flavor.
Well, I think what first of all, when I visit Afghanistan or Iraq as a member of Congress, it's a lot better than going as a member of the United States Marine Corps. But the fact is I have to rely on talking to those Marines and soldiers on the ground, as well as their counterparts in the State Department, in terms of what's going on there. Because of the security, I can't get out like I did when I was in the United States Marine Corps. But that experience of having helped the Iraqis on their elections in 2005 and having worked in the Western Euphrates River Valley to help establish interim local governments in the middle of that insurgency really led me to the conclusion that we need to be tough as a country, which we were, but we need to be smarter in terms of our policies. And the notion of this heavy military footprint with nation building, where I think that there are other avenues for which we can influence the direction in a given region by supporting factions that share our strategic interests instead of trying to rebuild and reshape these countries, is the way that we really have to go.
Let's get back to the calls. It's Carol on the independent line from Palacios, Texas. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. I'm a disabled American veteran, and my view of the Afghan war is you need to look at the people. The people are Muslim, Islamic law, and they do not care about Democrat and Republican, about democracy. They are tribal rule, and their economy is based on opium and who they can, you can buy their allegiance for a few dollars. For the kind of money we're spending over there, we could have everybody on our side in no time. And I don't understand why the Senate, ex-military people, do not see this simple fact.
Representative Coffman.
There's some truth to that. I think when we look at analysis and say, well, what are the Taliban paying folks and what are we paying folks? And there's certain opinions that if we simply pay more than they do, that would win the allegiance of some of the people. I mean, I truly think that there are people, certainly within the country, particularly in the more urban areas, although it's more of a rural population, that clearly wants to modernize this country and have institutions of governance that are reflective of international standards. But I just think that again, this is a bridge too far, and I think that what we can do at the end of the day that would be reasonable, because now that we're in, you can't simply walk away. But I think that there's a middle ground here, and the middle ground is this: that we can do counterinsurgency in the areas that there is relative security, according to the model that General Petraeus has, and do counterterrorism that was in fact advocated by the Vice President in areas that we do not have security. And counterterrorism is simply where you strike at threats where they coalesce militarily, instead of occupying the ground and trying to, through that security, to move a political process forward to create a civil governance. So I think that there's a balance, and then as the Afghan military and civil authorities gain capacity, then they can retake those areas with our support, as opposed to our doing the heavy lifting and doing it with minimal Afghan support or participation.
Matthew is on the line for Republicans from New York City. Hi, Matthew.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
Good morning, Representative Coffman.
Morning.
Just let me say first, thank you for your service. You know, we all appreciate it back here, and I know you guys don't hear that often enough. I wanted to say it's a breath of fresh air to hear, especially a Republican representative, you know, endorse a counterterrorism strategy over a counterinsurgency strategy. Vice President Biden has been talking about that for years, and to little avail. So it's good to hear someone, especially someone on the Armed Services Committee, say that. I have one comment and one question. My comment is, I'd like to get your comment on, you know, you said we should focus on maybe perhaps counterinsurgency in the areas where it's stable, but my understanding is that the Taliban operate with pretty much impunity in precisely those areas that are hard to control. So I'm not really sure how far that, you know, dual counterinsurgency, counterterrorism strategy might get us. But my question is what would you tell your Republican colleagues who inevitably would look at a shift to a counterterrorism strategy as a cut and run strategy, which, you know, they often say and probably will continue to do. So if you could comment on that, I'd really appreciate it. And again, thank you for your service.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you. Well, thank you. You know, I think it's more of a hybrid approach, with probably a greater emphasis on the counterterrorism part. And I think we're certainly in Somalia. I think you're seeing that. Probably a hybrid approach in Yemen. But a hybrid approach is effectively saying, you know, we can do some things to promote, to do these stability operations, but you reasonably can only do them in areas where there's relative security, and areas where there's not relative security. Then you really need to do that counterterrorism strategy. But I do think that, you know, obviously in the Afghanistan situation, it's a counterinsurgency centric approach, but I think that there is that middle ground that I think a counterterrorism strategy only isn't necessarily the right way to go in Afghanistan. But I think that what the Vice President said certainly did have merit. And where he was saying, let's not do the plus up, let's not do the surge going into, say, Helmand province and going into Kandahar province and going into eastern Afghanistan. Let's do a counterterrorism strategy in those areas. I do think that in order to have an effective counterterrorism strategy, you need to have some presence on the ground to have the appropriate intelligence to understand when those threats do coalesce.
Some of the writing, Congressman, leading up to the release of the report says it's going to be significantly less positive in its assessment of Karzai's government there. Move to the political, the governance part of things. First, what do you make of Hamid Karzai, the president?
You know, I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Karzai in 2009, and he was probably one of the most charismatic people that I met with. I mean, you really want to believe him, and then you read reports say about the corruption and things like that, and so you go, oh gosh, you know, it's kind of feel taken here. But I do think that I don't think that he's necessarily somebody who's supportive of democracy in the long term in Afghanistan. I think there's going to be a question of whether he's going to try and amend the Constitution to where he can succeed himself, and I think that's going to be problematic for the country. I'm not sure if I see other leaders out there, but again, I think we've set the bar just way too high for this country that is irrespective of the cost in terms to the taxpayers of the United States, and in terms to the blood that has been shed by our military personnel on the ground.
Before we get back to calls, we should plug Richard Holbrooke into all of this, who passed away this week. Headline in the New York Times puts it this way: post-Holbrooke question. What now? They write, with Mr. Holbrooke's death on Monday, the administration has lost one of its most resonant voices just as it completes this review of Afghan war strategy. His death confronts the White House and state with some difficult questions, starting with how to replace a larger-than-life statesman in a post that was created for him and which he built from scratch. Take it from there.
You know, I think the gap that will be left with the passing of Ambassador Holbrooke is the fact that he focused both on Pakistan and Afghanistan equally. And the reality is that Pakistan is the dominant threat here, not Afghanistan. I think that the relevance of Afghanistan to us is that it has a direct influence in terms of the stability of Pakistan, a country with nuclear weapons, a country with some sympathies towards radical Islam, a country that has a terrorism problem within its borders.
Let's hear from Franklin, Tennessee now. James, thank you for waiting. You're on with Congressman Coffman of Colorado. Good morning, James.
Good morning. I believe that we should get out of Afghanistan. It's just money that we're just throwing away, and that it's actually an opium war between the Taliban and the government. And there was a handful of people that started 911, and we spent a fortune on this right here so that corporate could make money on it. That's what it is. It took it out of the pockets of the people, so Halliburton and all these people could make a lot of money on this. We're going to have to wake up. It's corporate running this country, and they're manipulating us around, and they're educating us through the media. And if we don't get good media out here, we are lost. I'm telling you, this is what's going on. That it's scary.
Let's hear from our guest.
Well, I'm very concerned about the cost, and I think that it's just this whole theory of nation building as a cornerstone of counterinsurgency. I think the costs are prohibitive to this country. I think it's unnecessary for us to rebuild their infrastructure, to give them the economy that they've never had. Again, I think we need, if we narrow it down, this mission down to our strategic interest in the region. Now, certainly there are a lot of good humanitarian and noble, I think, moral ambitions that are laid into this policy above our security interest, and I think that we can still have an influence on those, but not so directly. We just need to bring this thing down, to have a much lighter footprint. I think we can accomplish our security goals without this robust nation-building strategy. But you're certainly right. The caller is correct to be concerned about the cost involved in this. I have the figures from September. I don't have the figures from October yet. And I believe that, well, the last figures I reviewed, I think that there was over $12 billion spent in a given month. And I think that that's just cost prohibitive.
Scottsdale, Arizona. Alan, Republican. Good morning to you.
Thank you so much for C-SPAN.
Sure.
Mike, I like to say something. First of all, I've never been in the military. But the thing is, I'm not stupid. You know, I can look at a map just as well as anybody else and see that we're in Afghanistan, and what's next to Afghanistan? Iran. Mm-hmm. You know, we're there. We're sitting there, and we're sitting in Iraq, and we've got them cornered. So, I mean, we've got military on each side of Iran. Isn't that correct, Mike?
That's correct.
Yeah. So here we're playing with billions and billions of dollars with Americans' money, our money, okay? And you know it's like we're doing training. You know, we're in a training phase of how to deal with these insurgent countries with radical Islam around the world. I mean, we're training our troops how to take care of these guys and take them out. and we are building infrastructure. The thing that's really crazy to me is why haven't we burned down all the opium fields? Why haven't we taken the opium fields out? That's my number one question.
Let's get an answer to that number one question.
It's a great question. And initially, I think when in early 2009, with the big plus up in Afghanistan,